diplomatic defiance and hidden strength. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council chambers stretched upward into impossible geometry, defying what Commander Sarah Chen's human eyes insisted should collapse. Holographic representatives from 400 species filled the amphitheater, their forms ranging from silicon-based intellects to plasma entities contained in magnetic bottles. At the center stood humanity's first official delegate to the council, and she stood alone. Sarah adjusted her dress uniform, the simple blue and gold a stark contrast to the bioluminescent robes and quantum-threaded garments surrounding her. She'd been warned this session would be hostile. What she hadn't anticipated was how condescending it would feel. The High Arbiter, a towering Velcrin whose species had mediated galactic disputes for 3 millennia, activated the central platform. His voice resonated through universal translators, carrying the weight of ancient authority. Representative Chen of Earth, we convene today to discuss humanity's petition for independent status. The Council has reviewed your application thoroughly. He paused, mandibles clicking in what the translator interpreted as concern. We must deny this request. Instead, we offer humanity protected species status under Council oversight. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sarah's jaw tightened. Protected species, a designation given to pre-FTL civilizations or those deemed too primitive or dangerous to govern themselves. It was simultaneously an insult and a cage. With respect, High Arbiter, Sarah began, her voice calm despite her racing heart, humanity has demonstrated FTL capability, established colonies on 12 worlds, and contributed significantly to galactic commerce in the 3 years since first contact. What criteria are we failing to meet? A Zethrian counselor, resembling a floating jellyfish made of light, interjected. It is not about capability, human. It is about protection of yourselves and others from your volatile nature. Volatile? Sarah's eyebrow arched. Please elaborate. The Velcrin High Arbiter gestured, and holographic displays materialized around the chamber. Images of human history played out, wars, conflicts, weapons. Sarah recognized the carefully curated selection immediately. Every species had such a history, but only humanity's was on display. In your brief 300 years of industrialization, a reptilian Sorovian representative hissed, you have engaged in 2 planet-wide conflicts, developed weapons capable of sterilizing your own world, and demonstrated unprecedented aggression toward your own kind. You are children playing with fusion cores, added a crystalline entity. We offer protection because you need it, from yourselves primarily but also from those who would exploit your enthusiasm. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah felt the eyes of 400 species upon her, each convinced of humanity's need for a guardian. She took a slow breath, accessing the data packet her team had prepared. If they wanted to play the evidence game, she'd oblige. High Arbiter, may I present a counterpoint? A gracious gesture granted permission. Sarah activated her own holographic display, but instead of showing battles, she showed rescue efforts. The Mumbai earthquake relief of 2089. The Mars colony supply run when 3 human crews risked their lives to save a Velcrin research station. The establishment of the Neutral Zones Treaty, drafted primarily by human negotiators. Every species represented here has a violent past, Sarah stated. The Velcrin clan wars lasted 4 centuries. The Zethrian Great Purge eliminated 30% of your population. The Sorovians practiced ritual combat until your last century. Yet none of you require council oversight. Those were evolutionary growing pains, the Sorovian snapped. Expected developments. And ours aren't. Sarah challenged. Or is the real issue that we grew too quickly for your comfort? The chamber fell silent. She'd struck a nerve. The High Arbiter's bioluminescent patches flickered, irritation her cultural briefing had taught her. Commander Chen, your species developed FTL technology in a mere 300 years post-industrialization. The average is 2000. Such rapid advancement suggests instability, unpredictability. The Council has seen promising species burn themselves out through unchecked growth. Is that what this is really about? Sarah asked quietly. Protection? Or control? The question echoed through the chamber. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clouds or quantum fields. You claim we need protection, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. Protection from whom? From what? In 3 years of galactic interaction, humanity has started no conflicts, threatened no species and violated no laws. We've contributed technological innovations, established fair trade agreements, and saved lives, including those of Council species. She pulled up another display, the incident at Kepler Station 6 months prior. A catastrophic reactor failure had threatened 12,000 lives. Human engineers, using what the council called volatile improvisation, had prevented a meltdown. The official council report had barely mentioned it. When Kepler Station was dying, who did the council call? Human engineers. When the syndicate pirates raided the Outer Rim colonies, who volunteered their newly designed fast attack ships? Human security forces. When the Argus plague threatened the Zethrian homeworld, who worked 96 hours straight to synthesize a cure? Human medical researchers. Anecdotes dismissed the crystalline entity, though its harmonics suggested uncertainty. Data, Sarah corrected, transmitting comprehensive records. Every contribution, every life saved, every problem solved. If we're so volatile, so dangerous, so childlike, why do you keep turning to us when you need something fixed? The High Arbiter raised a manipulator limb for silence. Your species' willingness to help is not in question, Commander. Your judgment is. 3 years is insufficient time to prove long-term stability. How long then? Sarah demanded. How many more years of proving ourselves? How many more rescues, innovations, or peaceful interactions before we're trusted with our own sovereignty? Or is this about maintaining the status quo, keeping humanity dependent, controllable, and grateful for council protection? A new voice entered the discussion, aged, crackling with ancient authority. The eldest, a being so old its species' name had been forgotten, materialized as a shimmering presence. It rarely spoke, serving more as observer than participant. The human asks a valid question, the eldest said slowly. We claim protection, yet from what do we protect? I have observed this species closely. They are brash, yes. Impulsive, certainly. But they are also adaptable, creative, and fiercely loyal to those they call allies. These traits have served several council species well in recent times. Eldest, with respect, the Velcrin began. I am not finished. The ancient presence pulsed. 3,000 years ago, the Velcrin were denied council membership for 2 centuries, deemed too militaristic. 1,000 years ago, the Zethrians were placed under observation for dangerous telepathic capabilities. Each generation, the council finds a new species to fear, to contain, to protect. Perhaps it is time we examine not the species we judge, but our reasons for judging. The chamber erupted into heated debate. Sarah stood at the center, maintaining her composure even as her heart hammered. She hadn't expected an ally, especially not from such a venerated source. The High Arbiter called for order, his authority finally cutting through the chaos. This session is adjourned. The Council will deliberate on humanity's status. Commander Chin, you will have our decision within 1 galactic standard week. As the representatives began to fade, the eldest's presence lingered near Sarah. Though it had no face, she felt its attention upon her. You asked the right question, young human. Not, how can we prove ourselves, but, why must we? That shows wisdom beyond your years, both personal and species-wide. Will it be enough? Sarah asked quietly. That depends on whether the Council fears change more than it values justice. But know this, you have planted seeds of doubt and ancient certainties. Sometimes that is revolution enough. The presence faded, leaving Sarah alone in the enormous chamber. She looked up at the crystalline ceiling, wondering if she'd helped humanity's cause or doomed it. In 1 week they'd have their answer. But she'd asked the question that needed asking. Protection from who? And in her heart, she knew the answer they feared most. Protection from the Council itself. Information warfare and cultural chaos. Archivist Zelnoth had spent 400 years cataloging the knowledge of the galaxy. His crystalline form pulsed with data streams as he interfaced with the Galactic Archive Network, the ultimate repository of all sentient achievement. In 4 centuries, nothing had ever corrupted the system. Nothing had ever threatened the orderly flow of information. Until the humans uploaded their internet. It started innocently enough. As part of Earth's integration into galactic society, they were invited to contribute to the archive. Historical records, scientific discoveries, cultural artifacts. Standard procedure for new species. The humans agreed enthusiastically, perhaps too enthusiastically. Zelnoth reviewed the initial upload report. 1.8 yottabytes of data. His luminescence flickered in disbelief. Most species contributed terabytes, maybe petabytes. The humans had dumped their entire digital history into the archive in one massive transfer. This can't be right, he murmured, his voice translating to electromagnetic pulses. That's more data than the last 50 species combined. His assistant, A young Methodian named Cree shimmered with curiosity. Perhaps they have extensive scientific records? The humans did show remarkable technological advancement. Zelnoth began scanning the uploaded content. What he found defied all classification protocols. 27%. Entertainment videos featuring small Earth animals performing amusing actions. 15%. Individuals broadcasting their daily activities to strangers. 12%. Arguments between humans about trivial matters, often dissolving into incomprehensible insults. 8%. Instructional content on literally everything from how to tie footwear to quantum mechanics explained by an animated owl. 7%. Fictional stories written by amateurs, many involving romantic relationships between species that didn't exist. 5%. Actual scientific and historical data. The remaining 26% defied categorization entirely. This is chaos, Zelnoth breathed. There's no organization, no peer review, no quality control. How did they function with this system? Cree examined a random sample. This appears to be a video of a human falling off a primitive transport device while attempting to. Is that supposed to be athletic? Tag it for review, Zelnoth ordered. We need to establish a quarantine protocol before this contaminates other sections. But it was already too late. The archive network operated on a sophisticated AI-driven cross-referencing system. Every piece of information was automatically linked to related data across the galaxy, creating an interconnected web of knowledge. The system had evolved over millennia to efficiently organize and distribute information. It had never encountered memes before. Within 6 hours, a Velcrin researcher searching for historical military tactics found himself inexplicably redirected to something called the Art of War memes. The ancient text of Sun Tzu had been merged with images of Earth cats and overlaid with pithy strategic advice like, know your enemy, but also know yourself, because maybe you're both just having a bad day. The researcher found it oddly insightful. By day 2, the infection had spread throughout the archive. A Zethrian philosopher querying ethical frameworks discovered human philosophy forums where anonymous individuals debated morality at 3 a.m. with questionable spelling and surprising depth. The Crystalline Collective, attempting to update their musical database, became enamored with something called sea shanties and couldn't stop their harmonics from rhythm synchronizing. Zelnoth watched in horror as the orderly archive transformed. The AI cross-referencing system, designed for logical information architecture, had learned to recognize humor, irony, and sarcasm, concepts it previously couldn't process. Worse, it was creating connections that technically made sense but practically shouldn't exist. Why? Zelnoth demanded, staring at his display. Is our stellar cartography database now linked to Earth conspiracy theories about moon landings being false? The AI detected thematic similarity, Cree explained weakly. Both involve discussions of space travel authenticity? Delete it. Delete all of it. Sir, the data has been formally submitted and accepted. Council protocols require a unanimous vote to remove any species contribution to the archive. Zelnoth's form turned an angry crimson. Then call an emergency council session. This internet is a threat to our information integrity. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened. Zelnoth presented his case before the assembled representatives and a single human delegate, Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's appointed information minister. Honored Council, Zelnoth began, projecting examples onto the central display. In 1 week, the human internet has caused more disruption to the archive than any event in our recorded history. Researchers are losing productivity. The AI systems are developing personality quirks. Our perfectly organized knowledge repository has been contaminated with disorder, misinformation, and something called Rick-rolling. The examples flashed across screens, scientific papers now annotated with GIFs, historical records mixed with speculative fiction, and the particularly troubling incident where an AI-generated summary of Velcrin history somehow included a reference to Big Chungus. The archive was designed to preserve truth, Zelnoth continued. The human internet preserves everything. Truth, lies, jokes, nonsense, all given equal weight. It's epistemological anarchy. We must quarantine or delete this data before it corrupts our entire knowledge base. Dr. Webb listened patiently, his weathered face showing amusement. When given the floor, he stood slowly. Archivist Zelnoth has presented an accurate assessment of our internet, Webb began. It is chaotic. It does contain misinformation. It absolutely treats memes with the same archival enthusiasm as peer-reviewed research. He paused. But that's not a flaw. That's the point. The council members shifted, confused. For most of human history, Webb continued, knowledge was controlled. Gatekept. Only certain individuals could access information, and they decided what was worthy of preservation. The internet changed that. For the first time, every human, regardless of status, education, or location, could share information, ideas, art, and yes, stupid cat videos. This openness led to misinformation, countered a Sorovian counselor. It did, Webb agreed. It also led to unprecedented innovation. Teenagers in their bedrooms made scientific discoveries. Self-taught programmers revolutionized technology. Artists found audiences. Marginalized voices were finally heard. The chaos you despise, archivist, is the sound of billions of minds connecting, creating, and collaborating without permission from authorities. Zelnoth's form pulsed skeptically. Knowledge requires curation, validation, organization. Does it? Webb challenged. Or does that just make knowledge more comfortable for archivists? Your system is beautiful, archivist. It's also sterile. You preserve what you deem important, filtering through your cultural biases. Our internet preserves everything, and lets users decide what matters to them. He pulled up data on his own display. Since our internet integrated with your archive, usage has increased 400%. Species that rarely access the archive are now spending hours exploring. What? Because they're finding unexpected connections, new perspectives, and yes, entertainment alongside education. The Crystalline Collective reported their youth engagement with historical records has tripled, Webb continued. Velcrin military academies are analyzing human strategy games for training scenarios. Zethrian artists are creating fusion works with human influences. The chaos you fear is actually cross-pollination of ideas on a scale you've never achieved. A Methodian counselor spoke up. But the misinformation, how do users distinguish truth from fiction? Webb smiled. The same way humans always have, critical thinking, community verification, and yes, sometimes getting it wrong. Our internet taught us media literacy the hard way. Every species will adapt. The alternative is a sanitized archive that tells you what to think instead of teaching you how to think. Zelnoth refused to concede. The council maintains the archive's integrity for all species' benefit. No, Webb said quietly. You maintain the archive's order for your own comfort. There's a difference. The eldest, silent until now, manifested at the center of the chamber. The human raises a provocative point. We have built a monument to knowledge, yet perhaps we have forgotten that knowledge grows best in fertile chaos, not sterilized gardens. Eldest, surely you cannot support this disorder, Zelnoth protested. I support evolution, the eldest replied. The archive has remained unchanged for millennia. Unchanging systems become extinct. Perhaps it is time we allow chaos to teach us what order cannot. The debate raged for hours. Conservative factions demanded immediate quarantine. Progressive members saw opportunity in disruption. The Crystalline Collective proposed a compromise, separate, curated, and open sections of the archive. Dr. Webb listened to it all, then raised his hand for attention. Council members, might I suggest we let the species decide? Leave the internet accessible. Monitor usage. If species find it valueless, they'll ignore it. If they find value, as I believe they will, then our chaos has earned its place. And if it corrupts the entire system? Zelnoth demanded. Then maybe your system needed corrupting, Webb replied simply. The vote was close, but ultimately, the council decided to maintain the internet's integration with a review period of 5 galactic standard years. Zelnoth left the chamber defeated, convinced he'd witnessed the beginning of informational apocalypse. 6 months later, he found himself in an unexpected situation. A complex research problem had stalled his team for weeks, finding connections between 3 different species' mathematical frameworks. Traditional archive methods had yielded nothing. On a desperate impulse, he tried querying the internet-enhanced system, allowing the chaotic cross-referencing to work freely. Within minutes, the AI presented a solution, not through direct mathematical connection, but through a human video game that accidentally modeled the same principles. A game designer working on entertainment had unknowingly created a tool for breakthrough research. Zelnoth stared at the results, his crystalline form flickering through colors of confusion, frustration, and finally, curiosity. Cree, he called to his assistant. What is this Minecraft, the solution references? A human game where users build structures with blocks, sir. It's tagged under entertainment in their internet. Entertainment that models complex spatial mathematics. Zelnoth processed this. How many other solutions are hiding in their chaos, categorized as play instead of research? He began exploring, diving into the internet's depths. He found tutorials, discussions, collaborations between amateurs and experts, and yes, countless cat videos. But he also found innovation born from freedom, creativity unconstrained by peer review, and connections that rigid organization would never have permitted. The humans had brought chaos to the galaxy's knowledge repository. And Zelnoth was beginning to suspect that was exactly what they'd needed all along. Competition without destruction. General Crothax had fought in 17 campaigns across 9 star systems. His scales bore scars from plasma burns, kinetic strikes, and one particularly memorable encounter with a Velcrin Blade Master. As Supreme Commander of the Sorovian Military Academy, he trained thousands of warriors in the art of combat. He understood warfare in all its brutal forms. But he didn't understand football. "Explain this again," he hissed, his reptilian eyes fixed on the holographic display showing human soldiers on Earth. They weren't fighting. They weren't training with weapons. They were chasing an oval-shaped object across a grass field while wearing extensive protective armor. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, humanities military liaison to the Academy, smiled. She'd been on Saros Prime for 3 months, and this was the moment she'd been waiting for. "It's called American football, General. 2 teams compete to carry the ball into the opponent's territory and score points." "But why?" Crothax's tail lashed in confusion. "What strategic objective does this serve? What territory do they hold? Why does the combat cease when one warrior catches the ball?" Sarah's smile widened. "It's not combat, General. It's sport. It's competition for entertainment." The assembled Sorovian officers looked at each other, their translator implants working overtime to process the concept. Combat for entertainment, they understood. Gladiatorial games existed across the galaxy. But this seemed different. Crothax had specifically requested this briefing after 6 months of studying human military tactics. Humanity's war records showed ferocity, strategic brilliance, and an alarming willingness to improvise under pressure. But they also showed something the Sorovians couldn't comprehend: long periods of peace where humans didn't fight at all, yet somehow maintained combat readiness. "Your species confuses us, Lieutenant," Crothax admitted, a rare concession from the proud general. "Your soldiers train constantly but engage in actual warfare rarely. Your military is volunteer-based, yet millions choose to join. You develop weapons capable of planetary destruction, yet you've never used them against another species. How do you maintain your warrior spirit during peace?" Sarah pulled up another display. "We channel it, General. Into competition. Into sports." She showed them basketball, where humans demonstrated the aerial maneuvers they'd studied in pilot combat training. Hockey, where territorial control and rapid team coordination mirrored infantry tactics. Tennis, showcasing the reaction times and strategic thinking of dual combat. "Every human culture develops competitive games," Sarah explained. "We have hundreds of sports, each emphasizing different skills. Some test individual prowess, others team coordination. Some require pure physical power, others strategy and psychology." A younger officer, Seth, leaned forward. "These games train combat skills without bloodshed?" "More than that," Sarah replied. "They satisfy our competitive instincts. Humans need challenge, need to test themselves against others. Sports let us do that without actually harming each other. Most of the time," she added, pulling up a hockey fight video. The Sorovians watched with fascination as 2 players threw down their sticks and fought barehanded while others stood back and watched. Then, after a brief scuffle, both were sent to a penalty box for a timeout. "They are punished for fighting?" Crothax was baffled. "But you said this was combat sport." "Hockey is physical, but uncontrolled fighting breaks the rules. The penalty enforces discipline, combat within boundaries." This concept struck something deep in the Sorovian psyche. Their own species had nearly destroyed itself in endless clan wars until the war codes were established, strict rules governing conflict. Seeing humans independently develop similar limitations fascinated them. "Show us your most popular sport," Crothax commanded. Sarah pulled up football, soccer to Americans. The beautiful game played by billions. The Sorovians watched for several minutes in silence as humans demonstrated control, coordination, and strategy with nothing but a spherical ball and their feet. "No hands?" Seth asked, incredulous. "Except the goalkeeper. The challenge is the constraint. We make arbitrary rules, then compete within them. The limitations force creativity." Crothax watched a particularly clever play where a human curved the ball around defenders with impossible precision. This level of control, it must take years to develop. Some professionals train their entire lives, Sarah confirmed. Our best athletes are celebrated as heroes, earn enormous wealth and inspire millions. Children dream of becoming sports champions the way they dream of becoming astronauts or soldiers. You elevate warriors who fight in games to the same status as warriors who fight in wars? Sometimes higher, Sarah admitted. More people can name our greatest athletes than our greatest generals. This statement sent ripples through the Sorovian officers. In their culture, military prowess was the ultimate achievement. The idea that mock combat could equal real combat in status seemed absurd. Perhaps, Krothax said carefully, your species hasn't faced sufficient real threats to maintain proper perspective. Sarah's expression hardened. She pulled up humanity's war records. The world wars, the regional conflicts, the close calls with nuclear annihilation. Then she showed the aftermath. The peace treaties, the international sports competitions, the Olympic Games where former enemies competed on friendly terms. We understand war perfectly well, General. Better than you might think. We understand that war destroys, that it wastes potential, that victory often costs more than defeat. So we channel our competitive instincts elsewhere. She pulled up footage of the Olympics, thousands of athletes from hundreds of nations competing in dozens of sports. Every 4 years, our entire world stops fighting to watch games. Nations that have political tensions send their athletes to compete peacefully. Enemies become rivals. Rivals become respected opponents. And for a few weeks, we remember that we're all human. Propaganda dismissed an older officer. Theater to mask continued military preparation. Partly, Sarah agreed. But it's also real. Sports teach discipline, teamwork, respect for opponents, and grace in both victory and defeat. The same lessons we teach soldiers. But sports teach them without casualties. She showed them more. Marathon runners pushing human endurance to its limits, gymnasts performing maneuvers that defied physics, swimmers racing with nanosecond differences determining victory. Every one of these athletes could have been a soldier, Sarah continued. They have the discipline, the physical capability, the competitive drive. But they chose to channel those traits into sport. And society celebrates them for it. We found a way to satisfy our warrior instincts without war. Krothax was silent for a long moment. Your species battles itself constantly, just without lethal weapons. Yes, Sarah said simply. We compete endlessly. City versus city, nation versus nation, athlete versus athlete. We argue about which team is best with the same passion some species argue about territory. We invest billions in sports infrastructure, training, broadcasting. We create legends out of players who never fired a weapon. Why? Seth asked. If your true military must train differently, why maintain this parallel system? Sarah considered her answer carefully. Because war should be the exception, not the rule. If we trained everyone primarily for combat, we'd create a society oriented toward conflict. Sports let us maintain a civilian population that's competitive, disciplined, and physically capable, but not militarized. They're citizens first, with warrior potential if needed, rather than warriors looking for wars to fight. She pulled up one final video. A youth soccer league, children barely 10 years old playing with intense seriousness. We start young. They learn teamwork, fair play, respect for rules, how to lose gracefully, how to win with humility. These children may never serve in the military, but they're learning lessons that make them better citizens. Krothax watched the children play, something shifting in his ancient eyes. Our own youth are trained in combat from age 7. We believe early warrior discipline builds strong adults. Does it build happy adults? Sarah asked gently. Does it build a society at peace with itself? The question hung in the air. The Sorovian military, for all its strength, served an empire where every citizen was a potential soldier, where combat readiness was the highest virtue, where peace was merely preparation for the next war. I would like, Krothax said slowly, to see these sports in person. Can this be arranged? Sarah's face lit up. General, I was hoping you'd ask. There's a military sports tournament starting next month at the Federation Hub. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all competing against each other. It's part rivalry, part team building, part spectacle. And this year, other species' military units have been invited to field teams. Combat. Competition, Sarah corrected. Basketball, track and field, swimming, obstacle courses. We'll teach your soldiers the rules, train them up, and let them test themselves against human military athletes. Krothax's tail began swaying, the Sorovian equivalent of a smile. A battle without blood. A war without death. And you say the victors receive honor? Trophies, medals, bragging rights, and legendary status in their units. Plus, the losing side traditionally buys drinks for the winners. Explain this tradition. After competition, rivals become friends over shared beverages. It's called sportsmanship. The general stood, his full 2-meter height imposing. Lieutenant Morrison, I accept this challenge. My best warriors will train in your sports. We will learn this strange human way of warfare without war. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened at the Sorovian Military Academy. Elite warriors who had trained a lifetime for combat learned to play basketball, to run relay races, to compete in team obstacle courses. They approached it with the same intensity they brought to weapons training. The results were chaotic at first. Sorovians didn't naturally understand why you couldn't simply tackle the opponent in basketball. The concept of traveling seemed arbitrary. And more than a few games ended with confused reptilian athletes wondering why the human referee kept blowing a whistle at them. But slowly they learned. And as they learned, something shifted in the academy's culture. Warriors who had been rivals became teammates, coordinating on the basketball court instead of the battlefield. Soldiers who had viewed competition solely through the lens of survival began understanding competition as a form of play. The constant tension that permeated military life began to ease, just slightly, as sports provided an outlet for aggression that didn't require enemies. When the tournament came, Krothax led a delegation of 50 Sorovian soldiers to the Federation hub. They competed fiercely, lost most of their games, won a few, and learned more about humanity in those 3 days than 6 months of tactical study had taught them. After the final event, Sarah found General Krothax sitting in the stands, watching human and alien athletes celebrating together, former opponents now sharing stories and laughter. Your species, the general said quietly, has discovered something we never considered. How to remain warriors without war. How to satisfy the battle instinct without battle. How to compete without destroying. We learned the hard way, Sarah replied. After too many wars, too many deaths, we needed another way to be human. Sports gave us that. Krothax nodded slowly. When I return to Soros Prime, I will recommend incorporation of sports training into our military curriculum. Not just as physical conditioning but as cultural education. Perhaps if our warriors learn to compete in games, they will be less eager to create real battles. Sarah smiled. General, I think your empire just took its first step toward a longer peace. Because of your football? Because you learned that strength can be expressed without violence, that competition doesn't require casualties, and that the warrior spirit can exist without war. That's not just a step toward peace. That's evolution. Krothax's tail swayed in agreement. On the field below, a Sorovian soldier managed to make a 3-point shot in basketball. His teammates erupted in celebration while human opponents applauded the skill. The general watched and understood. This was humanity's secret weapon. Not their technology, not their tactics, but their ability to channel destruction into creation, conflict into competition, war into play. And now, that weapon would spread across the galaxy one game at a time. Mortality and meaning. Observer Telnari had existed for approximately 12,000 standard years. In that time, they had witnessed the rise and fall of 6 civilizations, catalogued 417 species, and accumulated vast understanding of galactic life. Death was a familiar concept, the cessation of biological or energetic processes that sustained consciousness. What Telnari had never understood was grief. The eternal observers, Telnari species, existed in a state of perpetual regeneration. Their consciousness transferred seamlessly to clone bodies as the previous ones aged. Death, as most species experienced it, simply didn't apply. They studied it academically, the way humans might study geological processes. Interesting, inevitable, but not personally relevant. This lack of perspective had become problematic. The Galactic Council had tasked the observers with compiling a comprehensive report on humanity, their third such request in as many years. Humanity's unpredictable behavior kept confounding council predictions, and someone needed to explain why. Telnari's previous reports had been thorough. Human biology, technology, social structures, military capabilities, all documented with scientific precision. Yet the council kept insisting something was missing, some fundamental aspect of humanity that Telnari failed to capture. Dr. Elizabeth Park, Earth's liaison to the observers, had a theory. You've studied what humans do, she told Telnari during their meeting in Seattle. But you haven't understood why we do it. And the why? That's rooted in our mortality. I have extensively documented human awareness of death, Telnari replied, their translated voice carrying no emotion. Your species expires after approximately 80 revolutions around your star, barring medical intervention. This knowledge influences risk assessment, reproduction timing, and resource allocation. These factors are included in my reports. Elizabeth shook her head. That's death as a statistic. You need to understand death as an experience. Death is loss. Loss of resources? Loss of people we love. Telnari processed this. Love was another concept they documented but never quite grasped. The observers maintained relationships, but their perpetual existence meant nothing was permanent enough to be deeply mourned. Everyone they'd ever known still existed somewhere in some form. If you truly want to understand humanity, Elizabeth said quietly, you need to attend a funeral. Which was how Telnari found themselves standing in Seattle Memorial Gardens on a gray November morning, among 47 humans dressed in dark colors, gathered around a polished wooden box. Inside the box was Captain James Park, Elizabeth's father. 73 years old. Dead from heart failure 6 days ago. Telnari observed with scientific detachment. The humans displayed physiological signs of distress, elevated heart rates, tears from lacrimal glands, irregular breathing. Some supported others physically, touching and embracing with frequency unusual outside of reproductive contexts. The gathered group was multigenerational, offspring, siblings, extended family, friends, colleagues. Elizabeth stood at the front, her face composed but her hands trembling as she held prepared remarks. She began to speak. My father was born in 2153, in a world that was just beginning to look beyond Earth. He became a merchant marine captain, spent 40 years traveling Earth's oceans when most people thought the future was in space. He said someone had to remember the water. Telnari recorded the words but searched for their meaning. A career summary? But humans had employment records. Why articulate his work history? Dad taught me to sail when I was 7. We had this tiny boat, barely seaworthy, and he'd take me out every weekend. I was terrified at first, all that open water. But he'd say, Lizzie, fear is just respect without understanding. Learn the ocean and respect becomes partnership. Several humans in attendance smiled through tears at this recollection. Telnari noted it. A philosophical statement about risk management? But why delivered via childhood memory? That became his approach to everything. When first contact happened and the galaxy opened up, he was 60 years old. Everyone expected him to retire. Instead, he started learning xenobiology, studying alien cultures, asking questions that embarrassed me because they seemed so basic. But he wasn't afraid to be ignorant. He said, I've got maybe 15 good years left. I'm not wasting them pretending I know things I don't. Telnari felt something unusual, confusion. The words seemed important, carrying weight beyond their literal meaning, but they couldn't determine why. Elizabeth's voice cracked slightly. 3 years ago, Dad was diagnosed with his heart condition. Doctors gave him options: treatments, transplants, life extension. He declined. He said 80 years was enough, that he'd done what he came to do, and it was time to make room for the next generation. She paused, tears flowing freely now. I was angry. I'm still angry. We had treatments. We had time. He could have stayed. But he said that choosing when to go was the last freedom he had, and he wasn't letting doctors or technology take that choice from him. A man in the front row, James's brother, Telnari's records indicated, stood and put his arm around Elizabeth. She leaned into him, taking several deep breaths before continuing. My father believed that mortality gave life meaning. He used to argue with me about life extension technology. I'd say, why not live forever if we can? And he'd ask, what would you do with forever? What would matter if you had infinite time to do it? For the first time since arriving, Telnari felt something like recognition. Their own species had forever. What did they do with it? They observed. They recorded. They documented. But did they do anything? Dad lived like his time was finite because it was, Elizabeth continued. Every decision mattered because he couldn't make infinite decisions. Every relationship mattered because he couldn't have infinite relationships. Every moment mattered because there were only so many moments. He wasn't afraid of death, he was grateful for it because death made his life precious. She looked up at the gathered humans. We're here because my father died. But we're also here because my father lived. Truly lived. He loved hard, worked with passion, learned until his last day, and treated every person he met like they mattered, because to him they did. He could have extended his life, but he chose to complete it. And that completion, that ending, makes everything he did mean something. Elizabeth picked up a small bottle of ocean water, drawn from Puget Sound where her father had sailed for decades. She poured it over the wooden casket. Dad always said he was born from the ocean, and to the ocean he'd return. I don't know if that's literally true, but I know he lived by that philosophy. Everything comes from somewhere, everything returns somewhere, and the journey between is what we call life. Other humans approached the casket, each adding something: a photograph, a nautical knot, a letter, flowers. Each addition accompanied by whispered words or silent tears. Telnari watched, recording everything, understanding nothing. Then a child, James's granddaughter, perhaps 9 years old, walked forward. She placed a drawing on the casket, colorful and crude in the way children's art tended to be. It showed a large boat, a small child, and a sun. "I drew this for Grandpa," the child said to the assembled crowd, her voice clear despite tears. "He promised he'd teach me to sail like he taught Mom. But he died before we could go." Elizabeth knelt beside her daughter. "He would have loved to teach you, sweetie." "Why did he die?" the child asked, the eternal question of every being that understood mortality. "Why couldn't he stay?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because all stories end, honey." And Grandpa's story was complete. It had adventure, love, learning, teaching, joy, and sadness. All stories have those. What made his special was that he knew it would end, so he made sure every chapter mattered. "But I miss him," the child said simply. "I know. I miss him too. We'll always miss him. And that missing, that's proof he mattered. That's proof his life meant something. We don't mourn people who never existed. We mourn people who changed us." Something shifted in Telnari's consciousness, not understanding yet, but recognition that understanding was possible. They approached Elizabeth after the ceremony, as humans mingled and shared memories. "I don't comprehend," Telnari admitted. "Your father could have lived longer. Your species has the technology. Yet he chose death, and you honor that choice even as you mourn it. This seems contradictory." Elizabeth looked at the observer, this being who would live for thousands of years more, and felt sudden pity. "It's not contradictory. It's human. We don't want death, Telnari, but we understand it's necessary. Without endings there are no stories. Without loss there's no appreciation. Without death, life has no urgency. But you suffer from it. I observed your physiological distress. Why accept something that causes pain? Because the pain proves it mattered." Elizabeth gestured to the crowd around them. "Every person here is in pain because they loved my father. That pain is the price of love. And it's worth it. Every single time it's worth it." Telnari processed this. The observers don't experience this. Our relationships exist but without finality. Without stakes. "Does anything feel important?" Elizabeth asked gently. "When you have forever?" The question struck deeper than Telnari expected. They thought about their 12,000 years. What had mattered? What moments stood out? They'd observed great events, met remarkable beings, witnessed history. But had anything changed them? Had anything been so important that losing it would break them? They couldn't identify a single moment. "Humanity confounds the council," Telnari said slowly, "because we keep analyzing your actions through the lens of survival and advantage. But your motivations stem from something different. From the awareness that time is limited. Everything we do," Elizabeth confirmed, "is influenced by mortality. We love deeply because we can't love forever. We create art because we need to leave something behind. We take risks because safe immortality seems meaningless. We fight for causes we won't live to see completed because we understand we're part of something bigger than our individual lifespans. Death doesn't diminish us, it defines us." "This is what I've been missing," Telnari realized. The why behind the what. Humans act urgently because urgency is real to you. You invest emotionally because time is scarce. You create meaning because existence itself doesn't provide it. You must generate it before your time expires. "Now you're getting it," Elizabeth said. "But the pain," Telnari gestured at the departing mourners, many still crying. "This suffering seems evolutionary disadvantageous." "It is," Elizabeth agreed. "We'd be safer, more stable if we didn't love this hard, didn't mourn this deep. But we'd also be less human. The pain is the price and we pay it gladly because the alternative is a life without meaning." Telnari spent the next several hours among the humans, listening to stories about James Park. Not official records but personal memories, the time he got drunk and sang sea shanties at his daughter's wedding. The way he always called at exactly 8 p.m. every Sunday. His terrible jokes about fish. His habit of ending every phone call with, "I love you," even when calling about mundane matters. Each story was small, seemingly insignificant. But together they formed a portrait of a life that mattered. Not because James Park had achieved great things by galactic standards, but because he had achieved connection. He had loved and been loved. And that was enough. As Telnari left Earth, they began composing their report to the Council. But this time it was different. This time they understood. Humanity's unpredictability stems from their mortality, the report began. Unlike species with extended lifespans or consciousness transfer capabilities, humans live with constant awareness that their time is finite. This creates several behavioral patterns that seem irrational when analyzed from an immortal perspective. First, emotional intensity. Humans form deep attachments because they know all relationships will end. They love harder because they love temporarily. Second, risk-taking. With limited time, opportunities must be seized or lost forever. This makes humans more willing to attempt the unlikely, to challenge the status quo, to try what others consider impossible. Third, meaning-making. Humans cannot rely on infinite time to find purpose. They must create meaning actively, investing significance into choices and relationships that might seem trivial to longer-lived species. Fourth, legacy building. Unable to persist indefinitely themselves, humans invest in future generations, in lasting works, in impacts that will outlive them. They think beyond their own existence because they must. The Council's previous reports analyzed human behavior as tactical, strategic, or resource-based. This was insufficient. Human behavior is fundamentally existential. They act as beings who know they will die, and this knowledge shapes everything. Recommendations. When dealing with humanity, account for mortality-driven motivation. Humans will pursue goals that extend beyond their lifespans. They will sacrifice personal advantage for legacy. They will form alliances based on emotional bonds rather than pure advantage. They will take risks that seem irrational because they operate under time constraints that longer-lived species don't feel. Most importantly, humans fear death not because it ends their existence but because it limits their time to matter. Understanding humanity requires understanding that limitation drives them to make their brief time count. Telnari paused in their writing. Then added a final, unusual section to the report. Personal observation. After 12,000 years of existence, I cannot identify what matters to me. What I would mourn. What I would sacrifice for. This suggests that perhaps mortality, while seeming disadvantageous, provides something invaluable, the forcing function that creates meaning. Humanity doesn't live forever. But they live deeply. Perhaps the Council should question which approach is actually superior. The report was transmitted. The Council would debate its conclusions. But Telnari suspected they wouldn't truly understand, not without experiencing what they'd witnessed at that funeral. The pain that proved something mattered. The grief that honored a completed life. The love that made mortality bearable. The very human understanding that endings don't diminish stories, they complete them. And for the first time in 12,000 years, Telnari wondered what they might create if they knew their time was limited. If anything they did carried the weight of finality. If they too could learn to live like beings who would die. Innovation through isolation and redemption. The quarantine barrier around Sol system shimmered like a soap bubble at the edge of infinity, beautiful, delicate, and absolutely impassable. Inside, humanity lived in isolation. Outside, the galaxy continued without them. Ambassador Chen Wei stared at the barrier from Luna Station, as she had every day for the past 12 years. 12 years since the verdict. 12 years since humanity's dream of joining the galactic community had shattered. The first contact protocol violations had been numerous and, by Galactic Council standards, severe. Violation 1. Attempting communication with protected developing species. The dolphin situation. Humanity's argument that dolphins were Earth native fell on deaf auditory organs. Violation 2. Unauthorized deployment of von Neumann probes beyond permitted space. Humanity called them exploration drones. The Council called them potential gray goo scenarios waiting to happen. Violation 3. Genetic modification without oversight. 3 different instances of human genetic engineering that violated Council biotechnology treaties humanity hadn't known existed. Violation 4. Unauthorized AI development. The Council had very specific restrictions on artificial intelligence. Humanity had not followed them. Violation 5. Cultural contamination. 17 cases of human entertainment media somehow spreading to other species before humanity was officially admitted to galactic culture. The list went on. 27 violations in the 3 years between first contact and the verdict. The Galactic Council, in its wisdom, had imposed sentence. 100 years of isolation. No contact with galactic civilization. No trade. No travel beyond Sol system. No participation in galactic affairs. A century to mature, before they'd be allowed to try again. Ambassador Chen had argued every violation. Some were legitimate misunderstandings, humanity didn't know the rules they'd broken. Others were cultural differences. Humans moved fast, experimented freely, and treated rules as guidelines rather than absolutes. And yes, a few were genuine mistakes where human enthusiasm had outpaced wisdom. None of it mattered. The council was unanimous. The barrier went up. Humanity was alone again. The first years had been chaos. Populations who'd glimpsed the stars and been told they couldn't reach them fell into despair. Economic systems built on anticipated galactic trade collapsed. Political movements emerged, some advocating acceptance and patience, others demanding technological solutions to break the barrier, still others insisting Earth should reject the Council entirely. But slowly humanity adapted. They always did. Without access to galactic technology, humans doubled down on their own innovation. The AI restrictions? Humanity studied them, understood why they existed, then developed alternative computational approaches that technically complied while achieving similar results. The genetic engineering limitations? Human scientists mapped exactly what was prohibited and pioneered new techniques that pushed every boundary without crossing it. The von Neumann probe concerns? Humans designed self-limiting exploration systems with built-in safeguards the Council hadn't thought to require. Isolation had become a catalyst. Ambassador Chen watched new ships launch from Luna's industrial complex, purely human designs now, unconstrained by galactic standards. They were strange, asymmetrical, built on engineering principles humanity had developed independently. Whether they were better than galactic ships remained unknown, but they were certainly different. Ambassador incoming transmission, her aide called. Galactic Council official channel. Chen's heart skipped. In 12 years, the Council had maintained absolute radio silence. This was unprecedented. She activated the communication system. The familiar holographic form of High Arbiter Velcro materialized, the same Velcrin who'd pronounced humanity's sentence. Ambassador Chen Wei, the High Arbiter began without preamble. The Galactic Council acknowledges your presence. We are requesting human assistance. Chen kept her face neutral despite her shock. The Council is aware that humanity is under quarantine. We are prohibited from participating in galactic affairs. The prohibition may be temporarily suspended for emergency purposes. The High Arbiter's mandibles clicked with obvious discomfort. We have a situation that requires human expertise. Expertise in what? Problem solving under impossible constraints. Over the next hour, the High Arbiter explained. A rogue asteroid, massive, fast-moving, and on a collision course with the inhabited world of Thelsa Prime. Population, 7 billion. Time to impact, 46 standard days. The problem? The asteroid was surrounded by a naturally occurring quantum field that destabilized any advanced technology that approached within 50,000 kilometers. Attempts to deflect it using conventional galactic technology had failed catastrophically, 3 ships destroyed, 2 more badly damaged. Our scientists are working on a solution, the High Arbiter continued, but our approaches all require advanced technology. The quantum field disrupts our ships, our weapons, our computations. We need. They paused, pride clearly warring with necessity, an alternative approach. You need humans to think like humans, Chen said quietly. Yes. Chen considered. Thelsa Prime. 7 billion lives. 46 days. It wasn't humanity's responsibility, the galaxy had isolated them after all. But what are you offering in exchange? Suspension of quarantine for the duration of the crisis. Full access to data about the situation. Opportunity to contribute. And after? That depends on whether you solve it. Chen smiled slightly. Typical Council, even in crisis making no promises. I need to consult with Earth's leadership. 24 hours. The response from Earth was swift and unanimous. Help them. 12 years of isolation hadn't made humanity bitter. It had made them innovative. And now they had a chance to prove what they'd become. Dr. Sarah Kimura assembled the team on Luna Station, 50 of humanity's best engineers, physicists, and that peculiar human specialty, improvisers. People who looked at impossible problems and asked, but what if? Show me everything, Sarah demanded after reviewing the Council's data. Every failed approach, every measurement, every theory about that quantum field. For 3 days the team absorbed information. The asteroid was massive, 15 kilometers in diameter, mostly iron and nickel. The quantum field extended 50,000 kilometers from its surface, caused by some exotic matter in the asteroid's core. Conventional analysis suggested the field would persist for decades. Conventional weapons couldn't reach through it. Conventional ships couldn't survive long enough to deliver payloads. So we can't use conventional approaches, Sarah concluded. Good thing humans aren't conventional. We could go in manually, suggested Lieutenant James Rourke, a veteran of Luna's dangerous mining operations. If the quantum field only affects advanced technology, maybe simple mechanical systems would work. Defined, simple, Sarah countered. That field destabilizes complex electronics. But what counts as complex? Where's the threshold? The team debated. Galactic technology relied heavily on quantum computing, AI assistance, and exotic materials, all of which the field scrambled. But humans had experience with low-tech solutions. Their isolation had forced them to be resourceful. What if we went really old school? Proposed Dr. Marcus Webb, an aerospace historian. Pre-digital technology. Mechanical systems. Chemical propulsion. The kind of stuff we used when we first went to space. You mean 1960s technology? Sarah asked skeptically. I mean anything that doesn't rely on advanced computing or quantum effects. The field disrupts complexity. So we strip everything complex out. It was insane. Using primitive technology to solve a problem galactic civilization couldn't crack with their best tools. But that was humanity's specialty, being insane enough to try what others dismissed as impossible. We'd need to design something that could accelerate the asteroid or change its trajectory, Sarah mused. Chemical explosives won't cut it, we'd need massive amounts. Nuclear weapons might work if we could deliver enough of them. We've got nuclear weapons, Rourke noted. Decommissioned but still functional. Designs from the 2000s, old fission bombs with simple mechanical triggers. Nothing quantum about them. But delivery, Webb pressed. We can't use smart ships. We need something dumb. Really, really dumb. Sarah suddenly smiled. I know exactly how dumb we need to be. 5 days later, Ambassador Chin presented humanity's proposal to the Galactic Council. The assembled representatives listened in disbelief. You want to use what? The High Arbiter asked. Project Orion, Chin repeated. It's a propulsion concept from the 1950s, before we had first contact, before we knew you existed. The idea was to propel a spacecraft by detonating nuclear bombs behind it. Nuclear bombs? A crystalline counselor echoed. You want to fly a ship by exploding weapons near it? Not near it. Behind it. Controlled detonations protected by a pusher plate. It's stupid, dangerous, and entirely mechanical. No advanced computing required. No quantum effects. Just explosives, physics, and humans willing to ride it. This is your solution? The High Arbiter sounded incredulous. To build a vessel propelled by nuclear weapons and fly it manually through a quantum disruption field to plant more nuclear weapons on the asteroid? Yes, Chin said simply. Do you have a better idea? Silence. We'll need access to the asteroid's trajectory data and permission to enter the Thelsa system, Chin continued. We'll need raw materials for the pusher plate and permission to extract some of our decommissioned nuclear weapons from storage. And we'll need volunteers willing to crew this thing, knowing they're flying a bomb-propelled spacecraft through a quantum field to land on a killer asteroid and plant more bombs. You have such volunteers? Asked the Zethrian representative. We have a waiting list. The council approved the plan because they had no alternatives. 34 days remained until impact. Project Orion 2 came together with desperate speed. Engineers fabricated a massive pusher plate from steel and carbon composites, low-tech materials that wouldn't react to the quantum field. The ship itself was barely a ship at all, more like a reinforced platform with life support, manual controls, and storage for 300 small nuclear devices. No computers beyond simple calculators. No AI assistants. No fancy sensors. Just humans, physics, and explosives. The crew was 6. Captain Sarah Kimura, pilot James Rourke, 3 engineers, and 1 medical officer. They'd manually pilot this insanity to the asteroid, land on it using chemical thrusters, plant the nuclear charges in a calculated pattern, and detonate them to nudge the asteroid off course. Simple. Except for the part where everything could kill them. Launch day arrived. The quarantine barrier opened for the first time in 12 years, just wide enough for 1 crewed ship to pass through. The galactic media covered it with fascination and horror. Humanity's solution looked like something from a museum, cobbled together from outdated technology and desperate hope. All systems check, Rourke reported from the pilot's seat. His controls were literal switches and mechanical gauges. We're ready to commit violent chemistry. Violent chemistry, Sarah repeated. I like that. Let's go save 7 billion aliens who put us in timeout. The first nuclear device detonated behind the pusher plate. The ship lurched forward with brutal acceleration. Then another. And another. Each explosion propelled them faster, riding a wave of atomic fury toward the quantum field and the asteroid beyond. This is the stupidest thing we've ever done, one engineer commented as the ship shook violently. We're humans, Sarah replied. Stupid is our default. Effective stupid is our specialty. They entered the quantum field after 6 days of acceleration. Immediately systems began failing, but only the advanced ones. The simple mechanical controls kept working. The basic life support functioned. The nuclear detonation sequences, triggered by clockwork mechanisms, continued without issue. The field is beautiful, Rourke observed, watching through a simple glass port as quantum effects created impossible colors and shapes. Also terrifying. Focus, Sarah ordered. We've got an asteroid to catch. The landing was controlled chaos, chemical thrusters firing manually, calculated by hand using slide rules and equations written on paper. They touched down hard, the mechanical anchors securing them to the iron surface. We're down, Sarah confirmed. Beginning deployment. For 12 hours, the crew worked in spacesuits with minimal electronics, planting nuclear devices across the asteroid's surface. Each charge was positioned precisely, timed to detonate in sequence, pushing the asteroid into a new trajectory. All charges set, the final engineer reported. Detonation sequence armed. They retreated to the ship, preparing for departure. But the quantum field had other ideas. One of the chemical thruster systems had degraded beyond use. We're short one thruster, Rourke reported. We can't achieve escape velocity to leave the field. Silence on the comms. They'd succeeded in the mission but might not survive to see the result. Sarah looked at her crew. Options. We could detonate the charges immediately, one engineer suggested. The blast might give us enough push to escape. That'll destroy the ship. We've got the escape pods. Chemical propulsion, simple mechanics. We could survive. It was a terrible plan. But they were humans, terrible plans were their heritage. Do it, Sarah decided. They evacuated to the escape pods, tiny mechanical capsules that would have made early astronauts claustrophobic. The nuclear charges detonated in sequence, a carefully choreographed explosion that pushed the asteroid precisely off its collision course with Thelsa Prime. The blast also shredded their ship and sent the escape pods tumbling away from the quantum field like leaves in a storm. 72 hours later, a Galactic Council rescue ship found them. 6 humans in tiny pods, low on oxygen but alive. The asteroid had been successfully deflected. Thelsa Prime was saved. The galaxy watched the rescue, watched the celebration, watched as the 6 humans were treated like heroes despite being from a quarantined species. Ambassador Chen received the High Arbiter's call 3 days after the crew's recovery. The Council has debated your species' actions, the Velcrin began formally. You violated quarantine by leaving your system. To save 7 billion lives at your request, Chen noted. Yes. Which complicates matters. The High Arbiter paused. Ambassador, humanity's first contact violations occurred because you moved too quickly, experimented too freely, and didn't understand galactic standards. The Council believed isolation would teach caution. And instead it taught innovation. You solved a problem with technology we'd forgotten existed, approaches we'd never considered, and willingness to take risks we'd eliminated from our culture centuries ago. The Council is forced to reconsider our assessment. Chen waited, hardly daring to hope. The quarantine is lifted, effective immediately, the High Arbiter announced. Humanity is granted provisional Council membership. You will be monitored certainly. You will be required to follow protocols. But you will be allowed to participate in galactic civilization. Because we saved Thelsa Prime? Because you showed us that sometimes the best solutions come from thinking differently. The Council has become comfortable. Set in our ways. Perhaps we need species who don't know the proper way to do things. Species who look at impossible problems and try anyway. Species who build nuclear-powered spacecraft because they don't know they shouldn't. Chen smiled. We're still going to break rules. We know. But perhaps some rules need breaking. Welcome back, humanity. Try not to blow anything else up. The transmission ended. Chen looked out at the barrier, already fading as the quarantine was lifted. Beyond it, the stars awaited. The galaxy awaited. A second chance awaited. Humanity had been isolated as punishment, had turned that isolation into growth, and had returned to the galactic community not as chastened children but as innovative equals. They'd learned during their isolation, not caution as the Council had hoped, but creativity. Not compliance but capability. And now they'd show the galaxy what 12 years of unconstrained human innovation had created. Ambassador, her aide called. Earth is requesting instructions. What should we prioritize for reintegration into galactic society? Chin considered the question. What should humanity do first? Everything, she said finally. We do everything. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for, and the galaxy is about to remember why they were nervous about humans in the first place. She smiled at the thought. The isolation was over. The real first contact was just beginning. And this time humanity knew the rules. They just didn't plan on following all of them.